you know, I believe that we were here, these new things. I always love to show these pictures. This is a diorama from Harvard Forests. These are these dioramas that show the history of forest management. And, you know, there are many different starting points for succession, and the degree of forest change depends on disturbance. And despite that, you know, there are models for how things change. What happened on the East Coast, if you're not aware of this, most of New England and a lot of the eastern seaboard was virtually completely cleared. You had people come in. This land was managed. I mean, I think that the authors of that article make a really good case that the land was broadly managed. The entire landscape was being managed by people who were there. But the depopulation meant that there was some of the forest structure that was being maintained by indigenous management practices was lost. And then when Europeans came, they began to clear this land. And that worked pretty well into the 1840s. The entire landscape of New England, for example, was cleared. But agriculture was abandoned virtually overnight. In the span of just a couple of years, basically roads were opened into the Ohio River Valley that changed the economics of farming in a very large section of the country, and all of this land was abandoned. Now, what happened here set the stage for what forests returned. In areas that were tilled, which you see here, these tended to regenerate into conifers. Tilling of the land changed soil nutrients, powerful influence on what dominated those lands. Places that were used as pasture were more likely to get invaded by pines. And that's in part because of how pines regenerate and how well they compete with grasses. There were some other dynamics here, but kind of the story of New England, contemporary story of New England, is that there are 2 points to make here. Number one, virtually the entire landscape was cleared, and virtually the entire landscape came back as forests. And that's that environment. It's really wet and so forth. For example, just in case you've read Thoreau, at the time he was writing, most of this landscape was clear. It was actually being abandoned and being reinvaded. But fast forward 100 years, and unless you knew what you were looking for, you wouldn't have known. You go there now, it's just wall-to-wall trees. Anyway, and then the second point is that this set up what happened next, and that's the critical thing here. The past determines the reality of forests as we see them now. That the past oftentimes is setting up the problems that we have to deal with. Case number one, fuels accumulation in California. Here is an example from Humboldt County. This is near Willow Creek. This is called Friday Ridge. This is an example of an area that was harvested, clear cut for Douglas fir, and then regenerated without any post-harvest management, minimal post-harvest management. This thing is now a huge problem. The removal of indigenous practices, which was burning, and then a lack of investments. You don't have to burn to manage well. It helps, but something needed to happen here. More replanting, some thinning, maybe even some herbicides. I'm not against herbicides in the right circumstances. You know, when you have a good plan, some herbicide applications, especially when you apply them with just a hatchet, there's this thing called hack and squirt. You just hack into a tree, just wound it, and just inject a little herbicide. There is very minimal environmental contamination, you know, and it's Roundup. It's not super excited about Roundup in the environment, but, you know, I mean, they are powerful tools, and they can be, I think that they can be used responsibly, and just some of that would have really helped here. But now what you have is extremely dense stand. It's not growing very well. It's growing all non-timber species, and it's growing them poorly. Nothing, no win here. Nothing, no silver lining here. All problem. all problem which is set up by the past. Past actions have laid the groundwork for the problems that we're dealing with now. And if you care about creating resilient forests, I think that this is a call to all natural resource managers. You don't necessarily have to be a forester to do this. I think that foresters have a unique role in addressing many of these problems because foresters are the ones who are learning to be the process for doing this kind of management. One of the most important problems that we're facing is, how are we going to pay for these improvements? I mean, we have so much work to do. The removal of Native Americans in California and the loss of that management regime has led to a densification of forests, and it has compounded our wildfire problems. Climate change has not helped. Building homes and developments in forested areas has really not helped. But we got some serious problems. Foresters can make all natural resource managers can make a very important difference in this. Roads are an important resource. They're something that we're gonna need. We're gonna need money, and then we're gonna have to figure out how to work out some of these other problems. For example, more mills have been closing in California than opening. And in particular, mills have been closing in areas where we need to do forestry. There are no mills really within easy distance of the Southern Sierra. The photograph here is from the mountains above San Diego. Also has problems with dense forests. There are no mills in that part of California. We have just a lot of land that needs management. The one thing that I think we could make a difference right now, maybe could make a difference today, is that the age demographic of foresters in California is very top heavy. I mean, gray hair, lots of gray hair when you look at the registered professional foresters. And in terms of like a job where you can make decent money right after you graduate and where you can live wherever you want to live, I mean, wherever you want to live. You want to, work for the city of Los Angeles, you can work for the city of Los Angeles if you have a registered professional forester's license. If you want to live downtown I don't know if you want to live downtown. I don't want to live downtown. That's me. If you want to live downtown LA, cool. Santa Monica, whatever. I know that there's some things that are nice about it. I have a friend down there. But anyway, you can't. And that's because the state needs foresters. It needs people who understand how to practice forestry and can do the legwork, that can sign off can write the reports and sign off on the paperwork to get this work done. There's a lot of opportunity there right now. All across the world, there's different examples of the ways that forests are managed, and not everybody has the problems that we have. Oftentimes it's places where oftentimes indigenous cultures are still relatively intact. This is an example of the north of Vietnam. This is in a part of the country that is where it's mostly indigenous people. And Vietnam's a really great country. It's really nice and really friendly. It is an authoritarian state. It is. It does not have the democratic norms that we have. It's not China, but it has been heading towards more inclusive and liberal government, towards liberal democracy and away from authoritarianism. I hope that continues because people are really nice. In areas where the indigenous cultures are intact, they actually have some advantages. They've been able to manage aspects of their forest resources in ways that I think are making them more resilient to the challenges that are being thrown at them. I think I have one more thing I wanted to show. And that's something for us to think about. Our problems are a legacy of what has happened in California, and whether that is the genocide of Native American people or past episodes of eras of land management and ethics of land management. The problems we're facing now, they're hard. And I will maintain, I've said this many times, the hard problems are the ones that are worth working on. And I feel that if you can make a small difference in a hard problem, that you are fulfilling your obligations to society. I guess that's kind of my perspective on this. This is French Broom. Who did French Broom?
Oh, that was me.
Jaden, that's right. Thanks for doing that. You know, this is, when you were talking yesterday, I was thinking about this. This is an old vineyard that was over. Jerry Brown, the former governor, the twice former governor, went to he studied at a seminary, a Catholic seminary. I did not know this. He studied at a Catholic seminary because apparently when he was young, he thought he was going to be a priest. And this is the seminary. It fell apart. It couldn't be maintained. It collapsed. But he went to college. This is near San Jose. The place was abandoned and it was overgrown. This had been a redwood stand, I believe, but it was overgrown. This is the vineyard, which was part of the seminary, and it was overgrown with French broom. This is another example of how the past makes a big difference. This was cleared and then it wasn't restored. It was left to sort of grow back, and because of the dominance of these exotic species, it's grown back in a way that's not forest. This is another example of difficult problems that we have to face. Our world is full of all kinds of difficult problems. And